If a recipient of a message is on the central route of persuasion, there are several different factors that are needed for high elaboration of that message. First and foremost is personal relevance and personal involvement. Personal relevance refers to whether the audience members feel like they are actually directly affected by the topic of the speech. So if an audience member or the recipient of a message doesn't feel like the topic of the speech, of the persuasive message, really applies to them, then they aren't very likely to highly elaborate on the message or travel on the central route. Similarly, personal involvement asks whether the individual is actively engaged with the issue at hand. So if that engagement isn't there, if the audience doesn't feel like they are involved in the message, then they aren't going to travel on the central route either. They aren't going to highly elaborate on the message. Second is accountability. When an audience feels like they will be held accountable for information after the fact, they are much more likely to highly elaborate on that information. The perception that someone or a group of people will be watching to see if the receiver remembers the information later on is enough for them to travel along the central route. And you see this all the time in class, when a teacher will say to their students, "Now listen carefully because this is going to be on your test," and suddenly all of the students bust out their notebooks and their papers and their pens and they are writing furiously whatever it was the teacher said because they know they're going to be held accountable for this information later on. They are highly elaborating on the information. Next is personal responsibility. This is when people feel like they are going to be held responsible for the evaluation of a message or for the outcome of the message. And it makes them much more likely to critically think through the message. So, for example, if you see your friend post one of those charity posts on their Facebook page, and they specifically tag you in order to ask you to donate to the charity, you are going to feel some kind of personal responsibility to potentially donate to that cause. Because if you don't, your friend is going to know that you didn't donate. And so this is going to have an impact on the outcome of that message. The message wanted you to donate money, and by specifically calling you out and asking you to donate that money, it's going to cause you to highly elaborate on that message and take the action that your friend wanted you to take. Next is incongruent information. Some people are actually motivated to centrally process information when it doesn't adhere to their own ideas. Now, this sounds a little bit backwards, but it makes sense when you think about it, because if we think that a situation or a problem is one way, and then we hear information that says that it's another way, we can have one of two reactions to that new information. Our first reaction could be to simply shove that information to one side and forget that we ever heard it, trusting our own instincts. Or we can question our instincts and say, okay, what about this new information? Where did this new information come from? How is it different from what I knew before? Why is it different from what I knew before? Etc. And so oftentimes we are more likely to highly elaborate on a message when it doesn't make sense to us, because we have to think more thoroughly about it. And then finally, we might travel on the central route and highly elaborate on a message if we simply have the need for cognition. This refers to a personality trait that is characterized by an internal drive or need to engage in critical thinking or information processing. So maybe we hear a message and we just want to think really deeply about it. Maybe we just have a really active mind. And so that might be the reason that we choose to highly elaborate on a particular message. And so any one of these factors can lead an individual who is receiving a message to highly elaborate on that message and to travel down the central route.